I now request Professor K. VijayRaghavan of NCBS, who is the Secretary, Department of Biotechnology of the Government of India and a member of the ICTS Management Board, to say a few words.
Good morning, all my friends on the dais. First of all, I should apologize for coming a little late. I took a wrong turning, as I often do. And it's really wonderful to be here today. And, we must congratulate everyone, Spenta, the scientists here, the administrators, the engineers, people who laid the bricks for, taking this idea and taking it to completion. So I think before I start, I should request all of us to give Spenta and everyone else in the team a great hand. The amazing ideal which all the people involved in ICTS took forward was to get people in place, even as all the complexities of dealing with the creation administratively of the institution, getting the land, getting things done, and so on and so forth. People were put in place first. And really, there are quality scientists at ICTS doing wonderful work, even as the buildings come up. People, of course, come first, but as Churchill said, and Churchill one always disagrees with, except on this occasion, he said that, we make our buildings and then the buildings make us. And that's very true. All over the world, centers such as this have blossomed not just because of the people, but because of the ambience which has been created, which attracts better people, which creates a better ambience, and so on. And the geometry of the space around is vital in ensuring that this happens. So congratulations again for building a great campus, which will be very vibrant and get people. We've heard about the government of India, and what is being talked about in 2005 is probably what's being talked about now, and will probably be talked about another 10 years from now. This is the way democracies deal with governments. We are rightly very critical of them, and that's the only way governments will function well, by constantly being critical and having an adversarial view of government. So there's no question of the importance of that. But there's something rather interesting about India since independence. Compared to other post-colonial countries, India was unusual that it actually invested in higher education and science. And that we owe a lot to Nehru and his view about why this is important. And I won't go into that. But that's resulted in an enterprise which is a country which is a strange mix of France and Germany on one hand, and the poorest of the poor countries on the other, in a salt and pepper mix. So we have the capacity in this strange country of understanding any topic and understanding any problem, but also the capacity to solve the problems right around us. And that really transforms this investment in science and technology into something which is both imperative, but also affords immense possibilities of change, of sustainable growth and development on this planet. And I'll come to that a little more. But as Indian demography, with this very large number of young people, attempts to pull itself out of poverty, there are lots of pressures which come from the government and from people at large and from a democratic system. And I'll outline a few of these. One of these is the demand for processes in whatever we do. And the idea is that you should do things properly. There should be rules and procedures. You're using taxpayers' money, you're using public resources, and therefore tell us what you're doing, and that's very important. But processes do not make institutions. It's culture and processes together which make institutions. And institutions quite often have extraordinary culture at the early startup stage. They lose the culture for processes as they grow a little later, and the challenge in institutions is to keep the culture while you develop proper processes. And very, very few institutions have managed that. The Tata Institute of Fundamental Research has more or less managed it. The Indian Institute of Science has more or less managed it. Both could be better, but they've managed it much better compared to other institutions in the country. And this is a challenge for the country as it develops more institutions to have culture as well as processes. I should say, amongst the many new institutions which started, if you have started recently in the last few years, if you regard them as clones of each other, then you find that some of them are doing really well, and the ones which are doing well are those which have brought culture into their processes. The other conflation is between precision and accuracy. There are demands that everything be done in a manner which is then converted into a number. Impact factor of journals, your citation, how many trips you made there, or what you did, what committees you served. And this is a global problem, and this is one of the greatest dangers to science and intellectual thought anywhere in the world. And combating this as scientists is a major, major challenge. As the scientific enterprise grows, there is a demand for a way of assessing people and institutions, and that's important, but that should not be conflated with just converting that into a number and taking a decision. There's another trend, also global, and fortunately the chaos that is India allows us to sort of subvert this debate, but it'll be upon us sooner or later. And this is the challenge of whether one should invest in basic or applied science. And this is a false debate because there's only two kinds of science, not basic and applied, good and bad. And so all the extraordinary basic scientists which we know of have been interested in practical problems. And as long as science is embedded in a broader cultural milieu in our society, this debate will go away. And that really is the challenge we have. How can we take our basic science from a situation where it is today, in which we take the best problems which the world has defined and try to be really good at that, to a situation where we, in addition, also define the best problems which the whole world addresses. And those kinds of new questions in basic science can come both from interacting with with our colleagues all over the world, but also by taking new problems from our environment, be they in ecology, climate, epidemiology, and so on, all of which wonderful basic questions can be done, but which are embedded in our contexts also. Finally, I'd like to end by coming back to the role of government. As I said, the Indian government has been extraordinary in supporting basic science, sometimes rather openly, sometimes allowing it to flourish without interfering. And that the government really needs to be congratulated for that, particularly the Department of Atomic Energy, which set up the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research. The Indian Institute of Science is another example, but many of the new Indian Institutes for Science, Education, and Research also encourage very strongly and openly basic science, as do many other institutions. So this is really very good, and the government needs to be congratulated for that. But the government, again, falls victim to all these other aspects which I warned about earlier, about requiring processes, conflating precision and accuracy, demanding that the fruits of this year's investment be translated next year, and so on and so forth. In that regard, the ICTS is in an extraordinary position. The closer you are to Delhi, the more likely you are to fall victim to all these kinds of demands. The Department of Atomic Energy is in Bombay, is headquartered there, so it can actually deal with Delhi with a little arm's length. The Tata Institute of Fundamental Research is, again, further away from the Department of Atomic Energy, further from bureaucracy, so it can actually have a little more flexibility. The ICTS in Bangalore is even further away from Bombay, which is very good. And in Bangalore, it's further away from the center of Bangalore. So it's really fantastic. So you have all the flexibility to ask for forgiveness for all your crimes rather than ask for permission. And in that manner, wonderful things can happen. So it's very important, with all this flexibility, that this campus becomes a vibrant place where students from all over India, all over the region, all over the world, and the best scientists from everywhere come in and interact and make this a thriving campus which feeds back into our society and spreads this culture which is so nicely developing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.